Hello and welcome to South2North, coming to you from Johannesburg in the Global South. By general consensus, the UN peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo has failed. The conflict continues, and by some estimates, 5.4 million are dead and hundreds of thousands of women are raped every year. Fearing the rising death toll, the UN has broken tactic. The peacemakers are going to war. Is this the way to create internal peace and prosperity in the Congo? And is it the way forward for international peacekeeping? Today, I welcome Ambassador Bene M'Poko from the Embassy of the DRC in South Africa. And coming to us from Nairobi, Stearns, author of Dancing in the Glory of Monsters, The Collapse of the Congo and the Great War of Africa. And later on, we'll be joined by Bernard Katompa, a seasoned business leader and the former CEO of Africa Liberty. Welcome to all of you. Ambassador, let's start with you. What is behind the conflict in the Congo?
It's a country which is endowed with natural resources, mineral resources, water resources, energy resources, name it, we have it. The agricultural potential is such that we can feed the rest of the continent. The minerals that are used to make satellites or cell phones, most of it come from Congo. We control about 80% of those minerals, but we're not making satellites and cell phones in Congo. Who is making them? Someone else is making those, profiting from the looting of the Congolese resources.
Jason, your take on the conflict. You've written a book with a very interesting title, Dancing in the Glory of Monsters. What's behind it?
Well, the title comes from a speech actually given by the former president, the father of the current president, Laurent Kabila. And I think it gets a little bit to what the ambassador was talking about. Laurent Kabila, when he was on his way to taking power, was confronted by many people who said that the evil in the country is Mobutu, the former dictator of the Congo. And they said that as soon as we get rid of Mobutu, then the problem will be solved. And Laurent Kabila said, all of you were complicit in Mobutu's system. I have seen all of you dancing in the glory of the monster. The problem is one, I think, that goes deeper than to just resources, and it has to do with politics. Politics in Kinshasa, where the government has been reluctant or unable to reform its own institutions, and politics in neighboring countries, in particular Rwanda, that has been involved in this war in the Eastern Congo for going on 17 years now.
But hold on, Jason, it hasn't always been like this in the Congo. In your book, you talk about 15th century Congo and how it had sophisticated political systems. So what went wrong?
Well, I think, to make a very long story short, you could say colonialism went wrong. It destroyed first through the Atlantic slave trade, and afterwards through the private kingdom of King Leopold II of Belgium, who ruled the Congo as a private fiefdom. And then afterwards, through Belgian colonialism, all of these processes wreaked havoc on local societies, on this local political fabric, distanced people from the people who ruled them, and created an artificial political entity, the Congo today, that has actually very little organic political legitimacy. And you don't have that social pact between the population and its rulers. So I think that it goes back a long way, this dysfunction you see today.
So, Ambassador, is it true your government, the government that you represent, is not interested in building institutions in the Congo, institutions that could strengthen democracy?
The governance that we are talking about, the law and order, it takes time to build it when you're coming from the kind of colonial history that we had. In 1960, at the year of independence, we have less than 10 college graduates. So it took a long time to send children to school, to build institutions and so forth and so on. But those institutions were weakened by the conflict. But the source of the conflict, it's resources. If Congo was a desert country someplace without resources, nobody would touch us. Nobody would be interested.
Let's come back to the current conflict, Jason. It's reported that about 5.4 million people have died, 2.5 million displaced, women raped every single day. Why is this catastrophe not being reported on? Why is it not the focus of international media?
In the Congo, basically, epidemiologists, as you say, tell us that 5 million people have died, but they've died in ways that are very difficult to simplify and to tell. And we care less about things that are difficult to simplify and tell, especially when they're happening in Africa. So in the Congo, 90% plus, more than 90% of the victims that you just mentioned are indirect victims of violence. In other words, these are people displaced by violence who then died due to diarrhea, malaria, pneumonia, far away from TV cameras, and not due to direct violence. The conflict that they died due to involved several dozen different armed groups, and at one point 9 different African countries. So you can already see that it is a very difficult story to tell. Journalists used to tear their hair out and ask me, how can I possibly tell this story in 400 words? And I think that's the tragedy of the Congo. We care less about stories that are difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, on the rape of women, this has been widely spoken about, rape as a weapon of war. And the soldiers, the DRC soldiers, have been blamed for some of the violations. Are these reports true about these rapes of women?
Growing up in Congo, I never heard of a woman being raped. That's one. And we were told that if ever a woman is raped, the community will come and kill the person. Our culture doesn't allow that. And if you look at all the raping taking place, it's in Eastern Congo, especially in the Kivus. It's a foreign element to us. Unfortunately, when people are fighting, in case of turmoil, it's very difficult to control what's going on there. Even the UN troops, they've been caught raping women in Congo.
Jason, you've spent time in the eastern DRC, in the eastern Congo, where much of the fighting and the calamities have happened. Tell us what you saw there.
Well, the east of the country is, as Ambassador pointed out, the whole of the east is not a war zone. But in a small part of the country, there are dozens of armed groups that fight with each other, often ethnically based, so they recruit based on ethnic lines. And the population very often gets caught in the crossfire. Now, I think one of the more disturbing parts of the violence recently is that many of these armed groups have become, you could say, embedded within local political and business networks. Almost all of these armed groups have connections with politicians, either in Kinshasa or elsewhere in the country, or are backed by Rwanda. And many of them have become invested in mining and other sorts of extortion from the local population. So it's a conflict that's morphed from more of a grassroots dynamic back in the 1990s to today really a deeply political conflict with many political actors in Kinshasa and in Kigali involved in the fighting.
I want to find out then from both of you, why have previous interventions at peacekeeping failed? Let's start with you, Jason.
Well, I think that there's 2 causes. The weakness of the Congolese state and intervention from neighboring Rwanda were never really addressed by past peace processes. And this is why I think now we're in such a crucial moment, not only because of the intervention brigade, but because the intervention brigade, this brigade of South Africans, Tanzanians, and Malawians that's set to deploy now in the Eastern Congo, is deploying within the context of a new peace framework that was created in February. And that involves exactly that involves reforming Congolese institutions and tries to prevent Congo's neighbors from meddling in each other's business. So this provides hope, but it will have to tackle vested interest.
Ambassador, you've spoken about meddling from the outside world. Is it your belief that the peace interventions have worked in the past?
The mandate of the UN didn't allow them to go and fight the rebels and intervene. They were there supposedly to protect the civilian population. But how are you going to protect the population if you're not fighting those who are committing the massacres? When in 1996, when Bernard Katompa came in, he didn't find an army. There was no army in Congo. The previous regime had destroyed the army. He had a presence of guards to protect him, and he neglected the army. The army was in neglect, in the state of neglect in the Congo. Most people don't realize that. Therefore, we had to almost start from scratch.
But the United Nations is changing tactics. The peacekeepers, the peacemakers are going into battle. Will it bring much needed stability?
We requested it. SADC requested that. We needed an intervention, a temporary intervention from outside to solve the problem. And with the intervention brigades, by the end of this year, the problem will be solved so that our newly formed military personnel can take over the security, the responsibility to secure the Congolese borders.
Jason, I do want to get your thoughts very quickly on the UN intervention. Is this a good strategy? Does it not compromise the value of neutrality, which many people expect of the United Nations?
The UN has been most successful when it's been given the political mandate to facilitate peace. Unfortunately, since the last peace process came to an end in 2006, the UN peacekeeping mission has been marginalized politically. I would challenge the idea that the Congolese government is moving us forward as fast as possible. In fact, on many occasions, it seems that the Congolese government is unwilling to carry out the reforms, some of the most important reforms necessary. I would just cite that despite massive accusations of corruption within the army, not a single person has been actually tried for those accusations. They are slowly beginning to try some officers for sexual misconduct, but even there, it's very slow, the progress.
I want to talk more about this and what needs to be done to turn the Congo region around. My third guest is Bernard Katompa, a business leader and civic leader. He has his own take on what needs to be done to get the DRC working again. Bernard, welcome. Have a seat.
Thank you.
Bernard, you come from the Congo, but you left in 1990, and you describe yourself as a civic leader. What does that actually mean when you're not living in that country?
My country is in need of people like us to go back and reconstruct the country. In terms of its resources, it is a geological scandal with some $24 trillion of resources. But the paradox is that when you look at the Congo today, with all these things, 70% of the population lives below the poverty line.
So what has caused this paradox? Is it a failure of leadership, the war, what?
We have ineffective leadership and we have weak institutions, which need some reforms and commitment to make a change.
Mm-hmm. So you'd agree with Jason's assessment about the weakening of institutions and that there's been no political will to rebuild those, even post Mobutu Sese Seko?
I agree with Jason. Mobutu took power in 1965 and ruled the country for 32 years. And in 1997, when he was terminally ill, he was overthrown by President Kabila. And from 1997, the country is under reconstruction, which never ends.
Are you not being hard on the current leadership of Joseph Kabila and even his predecessor, his father, Laurent Kabila? What about that colonial history, Cold War politics, outside forces scrambling for the DRC? Is that not part of the crisis?
I think Congo received its independence in 1960, and it is now 53 years. And I cannot continue to blame the failures of current leadership on things which happened 53 years ago.
Ambassador, do you accept that?
No. Congo has been reconstructed since President Joseph Kabila came into power. I'll give you an example. For the first time in my life, I voted in 2006. We have a parliament. We have a government. We're building the judiciary. We're building the army. In addition to that, we're building the economy. We just started. It's like a newborn country. Although we are 53 years old, but we didn't grow. We started growing very recently.
What is wrong with the current leadership of the Congo?
The leadership of the DRC should focus on building strong institutions led by competent people who go into politics not to serve the pocket, but with the best interest of people at heart. Mm-hmm. People who are determined to go an extra mile and who have passion for excellence to make things happen.
But what about civil society? You seem to be blaming the leadership and the politicians. The destiny of the Congolese is in their own hands. Are they mobilizing for this change that you are calling for?
The situation of the Congolese people is not difficult to understand. The Congolese people surely must take their destiny in their own hands. But there is a problem. The problem is that they don't know what are their rights and what are their obligations. So a small example is a salary of a worker being treated as a present because it does not come on a regular basis. And what happens? If your salary becomes a present, your performance is not going to be your obligation. Now, that results in mediocrity And that results in a situation where people are scared of going out and exercising their right.
Jason, I want to bring you in here. You spent a lot of time in the DRC. Your assessment of civil society, how vibrant is it, if at all?
The joke is often that Congolese politics and civil society is much like Congolese music. There are factions and factions. What starts off as one group then soon becomes 3 or 4 different groups. And I think that may pertain to civil society, but I would add to that that this is really the only way forward. The democratic process that the ambassador outlined, although I would disagree rather sharply about how much progress has been made in recent years, that is the only really way out of this. There is no authoritarian solution. There is no silver bullet. And this messy, chaotic process of opposition politics and civil society is the way out. But I think that especially now in this crucial period where institutions are very weak and meddling from the outside continues, it's very important to have outside facilitation and backing both from the United Nations, but especially I think from African countries that until now have remained on the sidelines while the UN takes most of the burden of peace building.
Ambassador, your thoughts on civil society? I mean, does an active, knowledgeable, well-informed civil society pose a threat to the government of Joseph Kabila? Does it serve the government that you serve to have a civil society that Bernard has just described?
They are very, very dynamic. They are not dormant. Anybody who tells you civil society in Congo is dormant is lying to you. The emphasis is on infrastructure. Because of that, we have an economic growth projected by the World Bank this year, 9.6%, double digits next year. You have to have economic growth first before you can solve the problem, social problems.
So things are looking good, Bernard.
People are being paid every day. The soldiers are being paid regularly today, since Matata has been prime minister. Civil servants are being paid.
Okay.
So I don't know what my compatriot talking about. Maybe he has been recently in Kinshasa, but the salaries are being paid.
I was in Kinshasa 2 weeks ago, and I came back from Kinshasa. What is being said is not the reality people see on the ground. Now, when you talk about GDP growth, you have to see the base of that GDP growth. You're talking about 17 billion of GDP, and you talk about 8.2% growth. That's what Prime Minister Matata mentioned 2 days ago, 8.2% growth. Now, you have this in an environment where there is no proper regulations in terms of the financial system. There is no regulations in terms of mining resources.
No accountability?
No accountability. You have 2 currencies which are running at the same time in the country, where you have US dollars, a foreign currency, running at the same time as the Congolese franc. So you have a situation which is a pandemonium. And when you talk about inflation, in which currency base are you talking about inflation? Because you have 2 currencies running in the same country. And when you talk about economic growth, does that growth translate in a better life for your people? Surely not. Because a person who has been suffering in the DRC continues to suffer until today.
What have you seen, Jason, as far as economic recovery is concerned?
Well, I would say the ambassador is right. The country has done certain things. There are roads being built. There are bridges being built. Some of the hospitals and schools are being built. But it's, I think, a fraction of what is needed. And I would add that you cannot outsource the functions of a government. The government is building many of these things with outside help, the Chinese government, the World Bank, and others. But you need a government to maintain roads. You need a Ministry of Health to maintain hospitals and to pay the people and to regulate the health officials working there. I think that's where the problem is. You need to have strong institutions. They're making some progress on infrastructure, but building infrastructure without building institutions, without building a government and a governance, I think is not going to be enough. So, and when it comes to the GDP growth, I think I would add with what Bernard was saying, to the extent that there is very strong GDP growth that, as Ambassador mentioned, is going to continue growing over the next couple of years. But most of this is because mining projects are coming online in Katanga province. There is going to be a huge boom in copper output from the Congo. This will provide enormous amount of revenues and resources to the government. But until now, it's very unclear whether those resources are reaching the poorest of the poor. This is mostly elite-based growth and not poor-based growth. Kofi Annan just in recent weeks came out with a report saying that over $1 billion had been lost in revenues because of mining deals that have been made opaquely and that allegedly benefit people in the political elite and not the people, including the President Kabila himself.
President Kabila has allowed that to happen?
Because of the situation we're coming from, which we have all described, it takes time, and give credit where credit is due. You know, you had to start with economic growth. Whether it's the base is 18
giving
billion.
mining houses licenses and
no, we have an
using
investment
money
code. Maybe my friend who have been in mining in BHC Billiton, he knows we have a mining code. The mining code, I know how it was drafted by the World Bank. We know that. But we're trying to modify it so that we have some kind of beneficiation. The Minister of Mines just passed a law saying that we need to process minerals locally so that there is a value added. That's the only way you're going to create jobs and wealth, if those resources are processed locally. But the mining code we inherited from the Bretton Woods institutions encourage exports. So we need some kind of beneficiation in the country. So all those efforts are being made, but I think we must recognize, even if you don't like the government, if somebody is doing something right, give credit where credit is due.
Jason, you look like you're dying to say something there.
Jason was talking about you cannot outsource. We're not outsourcing the service. United States government, United States, you are an American. U.S. is the most indebted country in the world. So what's wrong about borrowing money from the World Bank and African Development Bank? You come from the most indebted country in this earth. So there's nothing wrong by borrowing the money to build your economy.
Jason?
It's normal.
There's nothing wrong. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a government to be able to run those services. I think it's absolutely fine for the Congolese government to strike the deal that they struck with the Chinese government, to strike the deals that they have struck with the World Bank and other donors. But I think that at the same time, they can't leave out the importance of reinforcing, strengthening their own institutions.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, what I do want to ask you, the way forward, how long does the United Nations have to be in the DRC in order to establish a modicum of peace so that we can achieve all these grand plans that you have articulated this evening?
I will give the special brigade, which is being deployed today, a little over 6 months. They'll be able to resolve the problem in the North Kivu, about 6 months. And that's why we should look at Congo today as a post-conflict country. So we're embarking into a reconstruction program to allow the country to take off economically.
You look mortified.
We have a country which can generate power and feed the entire continent. We have a country which has plenty of water. Still, the majority of the Congolese population does not have electricity. Still, we don't have drinkable water or potable water in the country. We look at what is currently happening. Things have been done and not launched. So you ask yourself, where are the priorities of the current administration? We should focus on the right priorities, take every single effort we can, every single resource we can to defend the integrity of the country and not focus on things which do not add value to the Congolese people.
Jason, have you got anything to add?
I would say that the way forward lies in the way the Congolese have chartered themselves. They voted a constitution in 2005 that includes basically the blueprint of the way forward. It includes decentralized government. It includes regular elections, which have not happened because the local elections that were scheduled to take place never took place. Currently, the provincial elections have been postponed. It also includes term limits, and I very much hope that President Kabila respects the term limits. He's supposed to stand down in 2016. It includes a freedom to mobilize. The opposition leader has been under house arrest ever since the elections took place in 2011. So I think that this is the blueprint, the way forward. And if outsiders want to come and help, they should help that blueprint. Because at the end of the day, the United Nations, peacekeeping brigades, outside interventions will not be able to save the Congo. It's the Congolese people themselves. And all we can do is help facilitate that process.
Well, that's all we had time for, I'm afraid. Ambassador Bene M'Poko, thank you very much for joining us on South2North, Jason Stearns and Bernard Katompa. It really has been interesting learning more about the DRC, and we really hope that the DRC, the Congo, does rise up. Thank you for chatting to us. Once the Congo has peace, reconstruction can surely begin. A strong democratic state in the center of the continent can stabilize the region, which can only be good for African economic growth and prosperity. That's it for today. Please tweet your questions, comments, and opinions to @AJSouth2North or find us on Facebook. Do join me again next time on South2North. Until then, goodbye.